If you could rewind your life, do you think that you would be in a completely different place from where you are now? Or part of you believes in a little bit of destiny and fate, where you think that, okay, even if I made these decisions or I went in a different direction, I would still end up kind of where I am now based on just genetics or evolution, tendencies of mine, that sort of thing. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, whether or not free will actually exists with human beings or whether it's an illusion. Sit tight. So ancient schools of thought believed that we had a certain destiny to fulfill in our lives. Take ancient Chinese medicine, for example. There was this school of thought that each of us as an individual is given some sort of gifts by the universe. We have certain talents. We know we all have talents within us. Whether or not we choose to implement those talents throughout our lives, it's based on choice, you could say, and something called free will. But in this video, I'm going to talk about how free will can actually be an illusion for the human species. So this is an interesting topic. When we think of freedom, we think, okay, I have the choice to choose, I don't know, chocolate ice cream from vanilla ice cream. I have the choice whether I want to walk outside naked. I have a choice whether I want to wear my seatbelt. Right? We're full of choices every single day, and we make, I don't know how many, but we make a ridiculous amount of decisions per day. Sometimes we get paralyzed by our own indecisiveness. But talking from the aspect of fate and destiny, you know, there's this belief that all of us are ingrained with a sort of makeup to begin with. Even before we're right coming out of the womb, we have certain tendencies. And you could look at this from something like 5-element acupuncture and Chinese medicine as something called a causative factor, a CF, which is basically associated with our element type and what sorts of personality traits we may kind of be prone to, or what kinds of stressors we may be prone to, and tendencies just by birth, by nature, because we're all very individual. But this can be a topic, and I'm going to get a little maybe philosophical on you for a second, that can be discussed. Okay, I'm reading a book now by the author Dan Barker called Free Will Explained. And this is a guy who, he's a former evangelistic preacher turned atheist, and he is discussing the topic of free will, how this has been argued by scientists, by libertarians, whether or not human beings actually have free will. And in the book, he's talking about how free will can actually be an illusion based on our own perceptions. So, a couple quotes, okay, from the book. "We are the most creative animals on the planet. While most species are like classical musicians reading from the score, we can look away from the page and improvise. And improvising makes music come alive, if you think about it." So in the book, he uses the analogy of music, okay? Relating music to something like free will, and how basically it's almost like you could look at it as we're almost like jazz musicians. We improvise. We're not just always reading from a script. And by improvising, it's creating. And creating makes us come alive in our lives. So you could look at something like free will, you could look at something like destiny and fate as, okay, we have certain tendencies, there's certain roads that we are kind of by instinct and reflexes that we're going to go down, that is pulling us, the universe and mother just by nature is pulling us towards. But then we also, as human beings, and this is different from maybe like a squirrel who is just going strictly on instinct. If you ever walk up to a squirrel, it scurries away, it runs away because it's going into its survival mechanism and defense mechanism. And that's all it knows. It doesn't really have the brain capacity like we do as human beings, where we can fight the impulse or the normal reflexes. So genetically, we are not the most pre-programmed species, but species rely on built-in instincts and reflexes. Again, the squirrel. We have the ability to override those natural instincts and reprogramming our brain. So think of, just by our intelligence, we have many books and videos and things on reprogramming the subconscious mind, this computer of ours. So that's where we are different from maybe, in the book he uses the example of a chipmunk or a squirrel or anything like that that doesn't really have the conscious ability to fight that impulse. It just goes with what it knows, okay? And we also have the added benefit of this more complex sort of language with one another. So as you go through life, you are not usually reading from a printed score. You create. The raw materials that make up the vocabulary of life are deterministic instincts, reflexes, traits, talents, skills, energy, needs, desires, limitations, emotions, fears, pleasures, memories, stories, knowledge, opportunities, and more. You pull from this language and make it up as you go. So do we have free will? Yes and no, okay? It's not, again, what he explains in his book, Dan Barker, is it's not a scientific truth. It's really like a social truth, okay? We can't, if we believe something, then it is truth to us, right? If we believe the world exists, then it exists based on perception. So these things can be discussed and rehashed, but just as human beings, we don't exactly know the answer. So you could get very philosophical on whether or not we're actually free and have free will, okay? But another quote, you cannot be a you biologically or not without having been determined to be a you. So we have this thing called the ego, and it identifies ourselves as just human beings. So you could get spiritual and say that we're all the same thing, we're all one, and really try to think about it and really try to hone in and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, humans are smart, but we're also very limited in our capacity to really get it, to really get things, because we don't know. And it's the unknown that drives this illusion of free will, okay? We're usually making a judgment before we make a decision. So we human beings are indeed the result of predetermined evolutionary processes, which is almost like a melody, music, but we are also part of a society that transcends ourselves, which is the harmony. So free will is the harmonic structure to our melodic lives. It exists or not depending on our frame of reference. So again, it goes to this thing called perception. So should we even bother talking about it? I don't know. But if you're arguing and you're like, am I really free? I don't know. Free will doesn't become a reality until behavior interacts with social judgment, okay? Your own mind thinks it's free, essentially. So as long as we have a brain, we're never gonna quite understand it 100%. We're always going to think we're free, but we don't actually know. There's a lot at play here, right? Because even before when we're a little like Adam, we have predetermined structure to us. So who's to say that that's not helping guide us make decisions? But is it also, it also comes down to a state of morality. So, should the serial killer, just because he had a lot of trauma, or he or she had a lot of trauma in his or her life, and mental instabilities and things are off, does that not mean that we should hold the serial killer accountable? Well, no, because we have this moral judgment in society. So we can't all be completely free if you think about it. There's always going to be some rules and regulations in place. So when it comes to something like ancient schools of thought of destiny, and if you're tying in the 5 elements and how we all have a causative factor, we all have a certain element and tendencies and reflexes that we're prone to, yeah, that's always going to be ingrained in us, right? We're like the squirrel. We're always going to have a survival mechanism, defense mechanisms ingrained in us. So Are we truly free to make the decisions that we make? Yes and no. Because again, something may pull us to something else, but we also have the ability to override, okay? It's like being on a diet. We have the ability to say no to chocolate cake, say no to drugs, that sort of thing. So it's not a cut and dry thing, and as with anything in the world, it shouldn't be. So that's why it's an interesting thing to discuss when you think about it, right? So if we experience the illusion of free will, then we have it. And this is, I believe his daughter said this quote or something like that. But because it's not something we have, it's something we experience. So on that note, I hope it helps you think. And there's really no need to argue over things that we know that we can't explain, because we're always limited in a certain capacity in our brains. So the moment we accept that we are human and we get rid of our ego complex and realize that we do have limitations. Yes, we're smart. Yes, we're intelligent. Do we have all the answers about everything around us? Hell no. That's the point I'm trying to make. On that note, hope you enjoyed this. Make sure you leave a like, a comment below. Subscribe. I put out new videos, try to do it every week for you on all kinds of stuff: Chinese medicine, self-empowerment, philosophy, comedy. I mix it up. So anyway, have a great day, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.